The world had changed beyond recognition. Cities once bustling with life lay in ruin, overrun by an unrelenting horde of zombies. The streets were eerily silent, save for the distant groans of the undead that wandered aimlessly, searching for the living. A new era had dawned, and humanity was now fighting for its survival in a battle against creatures that were once human but were now nothing more than mindless predators. In the heart of what used to be a thriving metropolis, a group of survivors had found refuge. They were led by Captain Claire Thompson, a former military strategist who had watched everything she knew and loved crumble before her eyes. Claire, determined and unyielding, had always believed that humanity could hold its ground against the undead, but as the days dragged on, doubt began to creep into her thoughts. The fight for survival was becoming harder, and the zombie hordes were growing in size and aggression. The group had managed to fortify an old high-rise building, which they had transformed into a stronghold. The windows were barricaded, and every entrance was fortified with scrap metal and makeshift traps. Inside, the survivors lived in a tense, uneasy peace. Every night, the fear of being overwhelmed by the zombies hung over them like a dark cloud. Supplies were running low, and the survivors had grown accustomed to rationing food and water, knowing that there was no guarantee they would see another day. Claire stood at the building's makeshift command center, staring at a map of the city. She traced a finger along the streets, marking areas where supplies were still rumored to be located. Her mind raced with the same question that had haunted her for weeks: how much longer could they last? The zombies were evolving, becoming more organized. It was as if they were learning. Every attempt to escape or scavenge had become increasingly dangerous. As Claire mulled over her next move, a loud crash echoed from the lower floors. Her head snapped up, heart pounding. The sound of metal scraping against metal followed, signaling that the barricades were being tested. The zombies had found them again. "Gather everyone!" Claire shouted, her voice firm and commanding. "We need to move, now!" The survivors sprang into action, grabbing weapons, checking their gear, and heading toward the emergency stairwell. Claire quickly made her way to the building's rooftop, the last bastion of defense. From there, they could survey the streets below and see if there was any chance of escape. But as she reached the roof, her eyes widened in horror. The streets were teeming with zombies, and more were gathering by the minute. It was as though the city had become a feeding ground for an unstoppable army. One of her fellow survivors, Jake, a former mechanic who had proven invaluable with his technical skills, approached her with a grim expression. "There's no way out, Claire." "Not without a plan." Claire looked out over the desolate city, the horizon choked with smoke from the fires that had been burning for days. It was as if the world itself had given up hope. But she couldn't afford to do the same. The group needed a plan, and fast. "We'll have to fight," Claire said, her voice cold but resolute. "We've been on the defensive long enough. It's time to take the fight to them." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting we go into the heart of the city? It's a suicide mission. We don't have a choice. If we stay here, we'll be trapped, and they'll overrun us." "We need to hit them where it hurts, strike before they get any stronger," Claire replied, her gaze hardening. The survivors were already gathering around her, waiting for orders. Claire knew that this was a risky move, but staying put would mean certain death. The zombies were becoming more coordinated with every passing day, and it was clear they were no longer just wandering aimlessly. They were hunting. But as the group readied themselves to leave the safety of the building, a new question loomed: would they be able to fight back against an enemy that was constantly evolving? And if they couldn't, what would become of the last remnants of humanity? The stakes had never been higher. The world had fallen, and humanity's last hope rested on a group of survivors willing to face impossible odds. They were about to make a stand, not just for their lives, but for the future of the world itself. But with the undead growing stronger and more intelligent by the day, it was unclear if anyone would survive the battle for the new world. The survivors were now at a crossroads, faced with the decision to leave the relative safety of their fortified stronghold and venture into the heart of the zombie-infested city. Claire knew it was their best shot at survival, but as they prepared to descend from the roof, a sense of dread hung in the air. No one spoke much, but the tension was palpable. The world outside had become a different place, and no one knew how long they could last in it. Claire, Jake, and the rest of the group gathered around a table cluttered with maps, weapons, and scavenged supplies. Jake, always the realist, spoke first. "We need a route, something with enough cover. If we stick to the main streets, we're sitting ducks. The zombies are everywhere." "We'll follow the old subway tunnels," Claire suggested, her voice steady but tense. "They're underground, mostly sealed off. If we move quickly and quietly, we might be able to avoid detection." "Quietly?" Jake scoffed, adjusting his utility belt. "You've seen the way they swarm now. The minute we make a sound, we're toast." "We have no choice," Claire said, locking eyes with him. "The surface is too dangerous. Underground is our best chance." The others nodded, though it was clear that none of them were truly convinced. It had been months since the outbreak, and every plan they'd made before had failed. Still, they had no other options. The only way forward was through the unknown, into the depths of the city that had once been a thriving hub of human life. The group gathered their supplies, weapons, a few cans of food, medical kits, and flashlights. As they descended into the dark, abandoned building that led to the subway entrance, Claire couldn't help but feel a pang of unease. The deeper they went, the more isolated they became from the world they had known. There would be no turning back once they entered the tunnels. Once inside the subway system, the group quickly found that the darkness was disorienting. The faint hum of the old tunnels, once a place of routine travel, now echoed ominously. The flickering lights of the station cast long shadows that seemed to move on their own. The air was stale, filled with the stench of decay and rust. "I hate this place," said Sarah, one of the younger survivors, her voice a whisper. She was clutching a bat tightly, her knuckles white from the pressure. "It feels wrong down here." Claire gave her a reassuring glance. "Stay close. We've got this. We'll move fast and stay quiet." As they moved deeper into the tunnels, the sounds of the undead grew distant. But that didn't mean they were safe. There were always more lurking, hidden in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Claire's mind raced with thoughts of what might be waiting around the next corner. The idea of being trapped underground, surrounded by zombies with nowhere to run, was a nightmare that she couldn't shake. The further they went, the more oppressive the silence became. The weight of the unknown pressed down on them, each step forward feeling like they were walking deeper into a grave. Claire couldn't help but glance back every few moments, checking to make sure no one had strayed too far behind. Suddenly, a sharp sound pierced the silence, a metal clang from the distance. The group froze. They knew exactly what it was. A zombie had heard them. "Move!" Claire commanded, her voice sharp. The group immediately broke into a sprint, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls. As they ran, the distant groans of the undead grew louder. They weren't alone. With every step, the air seemed to grow thicker, and Claire's heart pounded in her chest. They had to keep moving. The subway tunnels were vast, but they were also a maze. If they couldn't find their way out, they'd be trapped. The risk of being surrounded by zombies was growing with every passing moment. The group's panic was starting to mount, but Claire knew they couldn't afford to show fear. The moment they did, they were done. Ahead, a flickering light signaled an exit, another subway station. Claire pushed forward, urging her group to keep going. The light grew brighter, and the sound of shuffling feet followed. It wasn't just one or two zombies anymore. The horde was coming, and they were closing in fast. Just as they neared the station's entrance, a loud crash echoed through the tunnel. A metal door slammed open, and a swarm of zombies poured into the station. Claire's heart raced, and she could feel the terror spreading through her group. There was no choice now. They had to fight their way out. The moment the swarm of zombies emerged from the darkness, Claire's instincts took over. She grabbed a nearby pipe and signaled to the others to prepare for battle. The survivors formed a defensive line, using the narrow passageway of the subway station as their last line of defense. The stench of decay filled the air as the zombies shuffled forward, their broken bodies jerking with unnatural movements. "Hold the line!" Claire shouted, her voice firm but urgent. "Don't let them get too close." Jake, holding a crowbar, stood next to her, scanning the oncoming horde. "There are too many of them," he yelled. "We can't fight them all. We don't have a choice." Claire barked back. "If we don't hold them off, we'll be trapped down here." The survivors, though terrified, began to fight back. Sarah swung her bat with surprising force, knocking back one zombie after another. James, a former engineer with an eye for precision, used a wrench to strike at the undead, targeting their skulls. The group fought valiantly, but it was clear that they were outnumbered. For every zombie they took down, two more seemed to take their place, emerging from the shadows like a nightmare that refused to end. As the battle raged on, Claire's mind raced. The subway station had become a battlefield, and there was no escape if they didn't act quickly. She spotted a narrow passageway leading deeper into the station, a possible escape route. But before she could shout for the group to move, a zombie lunged at her, its teeth bared. Claire barely managed to sidestep in time, the creature's rotting jaws snapping inches from her arm. She swung her pipe with all her strength, connecting with the zombie's skull. It crumpled to the ground with a sickening thud, but the danger was far from over. The undead were relentless. "Claire!" Jake shouted, his voice edged with panic. "We need to go. Now." She nodded quickly, her eyes scanning the chaos around her. The group was holding their ground, but just barely. It was clear they couldn't stay in the station much longer. They had to get to that exit, and fast. "Everyone, head for that tunnel," Claire ordered, pointing to the narrow passage she had spotted earlier. "Move, now!" The survivors didn't hesitate. They bolted for the tunnel, pushing through the growing horde of zombies. Claire, leading the way, heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps following them, more undead closing in. The tunnel was their only chance. As they rushed into the dark corridor, Claire's heart pounded in her chest. The sound of shuffling feet behind them echoed in the narrow space, and the smell of rot grew overpowering. The survivors pushed forward, stumbling in the dark, but there was no time to stop. They had to keep moving, or they would be overwhelmed. The tunnel was a maze of twisting passages, some blocked with debris, others leading to dead ends. Claire's eyes darted around, trying to figure out their next move. The sound of the zombies grew louder, too close for comfort. They couldn't outrun them in the tunnel forever. Suddenly, a distant growl made Claire's blood run cold. She turned her head to see a massive shadow moving toward them in the dark. It wasn't just a zombie. It was something different. A hulking creature, taller and faster than the others, was charging toward them. The dim light from their flashlights reflected off its unnatural features, a mutation, perhaps, or a product of the virus evolving. It was clear that the zombies were changing, becoming stronger and more terrifying by the day. "That thing is right on us," Sarah screamed, her voice filled with fear. "We need to split up," Claire yelled, trying to keep her composure. "Take different routes. We can't all fight it at once." The group hesitated for a moment, but the approaching growl of the mutant zombies spurred them into action. Claire made a snap decision. "Jake, Sarah, take the left path. James, you're with me. We'll lead it away from the others." Without waiting for a reply, Claire turned and sprinted down the dark corridor with James close behind. The mutant zombie roared behind them, its footsteps shaking the ground. It was faster than the others, its monstrous form seeming to glide effortlessly through the darkness. Claire's pulse raced as she ducked under a low-hanging pipe and weaved through the tight tunnels. She could hear the others in the distance, struggling to find a way out, but the mutant zombie was relentless. It wasn't just hunting them, it was targeting Claire, sensing her as the leader of the group. "James, get ready," Claire shouted. "We need to trap it." They rounded a corner and saw a partially collapsed section of the tunnel ahead, a large pile of rubble that could act as a barricade. Claire didn't think twice. They had one shot at this. "Now," she yelled. In one swift motion, Claire shoved a loose piece of concrete into the mutant zombie's path. The creature roared in fury as it charged, only to trip over the rubble. It stumbled, and for a moment, it seemed disoriented. But that moment was enough. Claire and James moved quickly, blocking the tunnel behind them with whatever debris they could find. They didn't know if it would hold the zombie back, but it bought them a precious moment to regroup. But the question loomed larger than ever: could they survive long enough to fight the final battle, or would the mutated zombies be their undoing? The tunnel was eerily quiet now, the distant growls of the mutant zombie echoing through the narrow passages, but for the moment, Claire and her group had bought themselves a fleeting reprieve. They stood in the dimly lit corridor, panting and sweating from the intense confrontation. The rubble barricade they'd hastily constructed still trembled with the force of the mutants' angry roars, but it was holding for now. Claire's thoughts raced as she checked in with her team. "Is everyone okay?" she asked, her voice tight but controlled. Sarah, her face pale with fear, nodded quickly. "I think so, but we need to keep moving. They'll be here any minute." "She's right," Jake said, his usual sarcastic edge softened by the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. "We can't stay here. That mutant's only gonna get stronger." Claire nodded grimly. They had no time to rest. They needed to find a way out of the tunnels before the mutant broke through the makeshift barricade and the rest of the zombies caught up. Her mind flicked through possible escape routes, but all she could think about was how much further they had to go. The subway system had become a labyrinth of dead ends and dangers, and they were running out of time. "Keep your heads on a swivel," Claire ordered as she took the lead once more. "We stick together, we move fast." They pressed on, their footsteps muffled by the thick layers of dust and debris coating the ground. The oppressive darkness made it feel as though they were trapped in some forgotten corner of the world, far from the places they used to know. As they moved deeper into the network of tunnels, the familiar sounds of the undead, grunts, snarls, and the scraping of claws against stone, seemed to multiply. As they ventured forward, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The faintest sound echoed in the distance, a rustle, followed by another. Then, more. And soon, there was no mistaking it, they weren't alone. "Something's not right," Sarah murmured, her voice quivering. "I hear them." Claire motioned for everyone to stop. They crouched low, hiding in the shadows, their breath shallow. The sounds grew louder, then clearer, a series of shuffling footsteps, accompanied by occasional growls and hissing noises. "Zombies," Jake whispered, but his voice held no certainty. The noise didn't sound like typical zombie movements. It was almost coordinated. Then, without warning, the silence shattered. A series of growls erupted from the dark ahead, followed by the unmistakable thud of heavy feet pounding the ground. Before they could react, the first wave of zombies appeared from the darkness, along with something far more terrifying, a new breed of zombie. These creatures were different. Larger, faster, and far more aggressive than anything they had encountered so far. Their bodies were disfigured and swollen, muscles rippling beneath decayed skin. Some had eyes that glowed faintly in the dark, while others had mutated limbs, elongated and twisted into grotesque shapes. These were not the stumbling, mindless undead they had been evading, they were organized, purposeful. "Mutants," Claire whispered, her heart sinking. "They've evolved." The survivors instinctively raised their weapons, but the reality of the situation hit them all at once. There were too many. These mutant zombies moved with purpose, not the erratic stumbling they had gotten used to. They seemed to work together, their grotesque forms swarming like a tide of nightmares. "We need to fall back," Claire shouted, already starting to retreat toward the path they had just come from. "Go! Move!" The group spun on their heels, running with all their might. Behind them, the mutants charged with alarming speed, their snarls vibrating through the air like a freight train. Claire's mind raced. The subway tunnels were their only chance for escape, but with the mutants evolving and the zombies adapting, the odds were rapidly shifting against them. She needed a plan, now. The tunnel twisted and turned, growing narrower as they moved deeper underground. The faint light from their flashlights was swallowed by the pitch-black darkness, and the feeling of being trapped intensified. It wasn't just a horde of zombies anymore. It was something worse, a relentless, organized force that had learned to hunt. Up ahead, James shouted, pointing toward an old maintenance door that had been left ajar. That might lead to a new route. Claire didn't hesitate. She darted toward the door, motioning for the others to follow. They reached it just as the first mutants entered the passage behind them, closing in fast. Claire grabbed the door handle and shoved it open with all her strength, sending a creak of protest through the rusted hinges. The group squeezed through one by one, just as the sound of the mutants' heavy steps grew deafening. But as they made their way through the door, Claire realized something terrifying. They had only escaped one threat, only to face another. On the other side of the door lay an even more dangerous area of the underground, a vast, cavernous space with no clear exit in sight. It was as though the tunnels had opened up into the underbelly of the city itself. "What is this place?" Sarah gasped, her eyes wide with fear. Claire took in the grim scene: abandoned equipment, old generators, and thick pipes that snaked their way across the floor. The air was damp, the faint glow from their flashlights revealing nothing but shadows. But there was something else here, something worse. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the walls. "Whatever this place is, we need to get out of here," Claire said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "It's not safe." But as the survivors started to move deeper into the space, something stirred in the darkness, an ominous presence watching them. The sense of being hunted was back. And they all knew, if they didn't act quickly, the new world would swallow them whole. The group moved cautiously through the vast underground space, their footsteps barely making a sound against the damp concrete floor. The eerie hum that filled the air was growing louder with each passing moment, vibrating through the walls and into their bones. Claire's heart raced, her instincts screaming that they were being led deeper into something far worse than they had imagined. This wasn't just a dead end, it was something much more dangerous, a hidden part of the city that the zombies had seemingly made their own. The faint beam of their flashlights flickered against the cavernous walls, illuminating rusted pipes and forgotten machinery. It was as if they had stumbled into the bowels of the world itself, a place long abandoned and left to rot. Yet, in the stillness of the space, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Stay close," Claire whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum. "We don't know what's down here." The survivors huddled together, their eyes darting nervously from shadow to shadow. Sarah gripped her bat tighter, the metal handle slick with sweat. James had his wrench raised, his knuckles white from gripping it too hard. Jake, normally the most composed of the group, was visibly shaken, his eyes scanning the space for any sign of movement. They rounded a corner and were met with an unexpected sight, a massive, open chamber filled with rows upon rows of cages, some large enough to hold a person, others small enough to contain animals. The sight was disturbing, and the air was thick with a sense of dread. These weren't just abandoned holding cells, they looked as though they had been used recently. "What the hell is this?" Jake muttered, stepping forward cautiously to examine one of the cages. It was old, rusted, but there were remnants of something inside. A torn piece of clothing. A bloody handprint. The unsettling realization hit Claire like a punch to the gut. This place had been used to imprison people, or worse. Before Claire could say anything, a low growl broke the silence, followed by a deep, guttural screech that echoed through the chamber. Her heart skipped a beat. The zombies were here, and they were no longer the mindless, lumbering creatures they had once been. Out of the darkness emerged a new type of undead, faster, more agile, and far more deadly. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, their movements more fluid and calculated. These were not the mindless hordes they had fought before, they were the next stage in the evolution of the virus, a terrifying new breed. "Run!" Claire shouted, but the command was almost unnecessary. The group instinctively bolted, sprinting through the maze of cages. The mutant zombies were upon them in seconds, closing in with terrifying speed. Claire led the charge, her mind racing as she searched for a way out. The walls of the cavern were closing in on them, and every turn seemed to bring more danger. The sound of the mutants' growls echoed in the chamber, their feet pounding the floor as they pursued their prey. Behind them, the survivors could hear the clang of metal as one of the mutant zombies slammed into a cage, knocking it off its hinges. The creature grunted in frustration but quickly redirected its focus, its glowing eyes narrowing in on Claire's group. "We need to split up," Claire shouted, barely thinking before grabbing Jake's arm. "Take the left tunnel, James, Sarah, go right." Without waiting for a response, she dashed down the narrow left path, with Jake close behind. The tunnel was claustrophobic, the walls pressing in on them as the ceiling dipped lower. Their footsteps echoed louder in the confined space, and Claire's pulse pounded in her ears. The low hum from earlier had intensified, as though it was feeding into their panic, amplifying the dread that seemed to seep from the very walls. "Do you hear that?" Jake panted, glancing back. Claire nodded, her chest tightening. The sound they heard wasn't just the rumble of the mutants' pursuit, it was something more. Something deeper. The sound seemed to vibrate through the ground, a pulsing energy that felt almost alive. "Keep moving," Claire ordered, though the uncertainty in her voice was evident. "We can't stop now." They ran faster, the walls narrowing around them until the tunnel opened up once more into a massive cavern. This new space was even darker than the last, the air thick with the smell of mildew and decay. The mutants were close, she could hear their growls growing louder as they caught up to the group. Suddenly, the hum they had been hearing took on a new rhythm, faster, more chaotic. It wasn't just the noise of the mutants. It was something else. Something far more ominous. "Get down!" Claire shouted, pushing Jake to the ground just as the air around them seemed to crackle with energy. A blast of light shot through the cavern, blinding them both momentarily. The mutants halted in their tracks, momentarily disoriented by the sudden flash. But Claire knew they didn't have long before the undead recovered. They needed to get out of there, now. "Through the doors!" Claire shouted, spotting a set of heavy, rusted doors at the far end of the cavern. The light had momentarily stunned the mutants, giving them the break they desperately needed. Together, Claire and Jake scrambled toward the doors, the sound of the mutants' growls growing louder in the background. They could feel the heat of the creature's pursuit on their backs, but the doors were in sight. Just a little further. As they reached the doors, Claire shoved them open with all her strength, and the group burst through into another series of tunnels, this time more open, with what appeared to be old, industrial equipment lining the walls. The tunnels were not as tight as the others, offering more room to maneuver, but it was still uncertain how much time they had before the mutants broke through. "We have to get to the surface," Claire said, panting. "Before they figure out how to follow us." But as they raced down the new path, a new realization struck her: they were getting closer to something worse than they could possibly imagine. The sound of their heavy breathing echoed off the steel walls of the industrial tunnel as Claire and her group sprinted through the dark, their shoes slapping against the slick, wet floor. The mutants were relentless, their growls and hissing fading only slightly behind them as they rushed forward. Claire's heart raced, her body moving on instinct as the weight of their situation settled like a vice around her chest. The surface felt farther away than ever, and the deeper they went into the labyrinth of tunnels, the more claustrophobic it felt. Each corner, each turn seemed to bring them further into a world of shadows and decay, and the sensation of being trapped was suffocating. There was no way out unless they found a way to escape the mutants, and whatever else had been waiting in the depths of this place. "Claire," Jake called out, his voice strained, "we can't keep running forever. We need to figure out what the hell this place is." "We'll figure it out later," Claire said, her voice tight. "For now, we keep moving." But as they turned another corner, they were met with an unexpected sight. The tunnel widened into a massive cavern, a grotesque, wretched labyrinth of shattered glass, broken machinery, and strange, glowing veins pulsating from the walls. The atmosphere was thick with a vile, acidic smell, and in the center of the chamber stood a massive metal structure, half buried in rubble, its surface covered with a strange organic growth. "What is this place?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Her flashlight beam traced the strange veins in the walls, and Claire could see her hand shaking as she clutched the bat tighter. "I don't know," Claire replied, her own pulse quickening. Something about the room felt wrong. It wasn't just the size or the eerie glow, it was as though the very air around them was alive, shifting, pulsating with an unnatural energy. The hum that had been following them now vibrated through their bones, its pitch rising in intensity. "Look," Jake said, pointing towards the structure in the center. The metal was old, rusted, but there was something about it that stood out. It was almost as if it was breathing, an organic, rhythmic pulse emanated from it. Claire's heart dropped into her stomach. It's a lab. This was a research facility. Wait, Sarah hesitated. Are you saying this is where it all started? Before Claire could answer, there was a sudden burst of movement from the shadows. One of the mutants appeared, followed by two more, and they were moving faster than ever before. The group had no time to react as the creatures lunged at them with terrifying speed, their glowing eyes filled with hunger and malice. Claire barely had time to raise her gun before one of the mutants grabbed hold of Jake, its grotesque, mutated hand wrapping around his arm with crushing force. He screamed as the creature pulled him closer, its mouth opening wide to feast on him. "Jake!" Sarah screamed, rushing forward with her bat raised. But before she could reach him, Claire fired a shot into the mutant's chest. The creature staggered back, its scream piercing the air, but it wasn't enough to stop it. The mutant roared in fury, charging again. "Get back!" Claire shouted, shoving Sarah away as the other mutants closed in. They had no choice but to retreat, there was no time for a fight. Claire grabbed Jake by the arm, yanking him away from the mutant's grip. Blood dripped from his shoulder, but he was alive, barely. "We need to get to that structure," Claire shouted, her voice filled with urgency. "It might be our only chance." Jake nodded weakly, but the mutants were closing in fast. The group had no choice. They ran toward the ominous lab structure, the mutants hot on their heels, snarling and snapping. Claire's mind raced as she led them towards the metal monstrosity at the center of the room. She didn't know what it was, but it had to be their way out, or at least a way to hold off the creatures long enough to survive. As they neared the structure, Claire saw something else, a set of doors built into the side, hidden behind piles of debris. They looked old, almost forgotten. If they could just make it inside. "Over there!" Claire shouted, pointing toward the doors. Without hesitation, the group bolted for the entrance, with the mutants closing in faster than they'd anticipated. The lead mutant was now so close that Claire could feel its breath on her neck. With one last effort, Claire lunged forward, reaching the doors and slamming them open. The others followed, barely making it inside before the mutants reached them. Claire slammed the door shut behind them, locking it with a heavy metal bolt. The group collapsed against the door, their chests heaving with exhaustion. The sound of the mutants clawing at the metal door echoed through the small room, but for now, they were safe. The room they had entered was dimly lit, with strange equipment lining the walls. The atmosphere inside was colder than outside, and there was a faint, metallic smell in the air. The hum from earlier had stopped, but it was replaced with a deeper, more foreboding vibration, as though the entire room was alive, thrumming with energy. "What is this place?" Sarah whispered, looking around nervously. Claire's gaze scanned the room, and for a moment, everything seemed to slow down as she processed what she was seeing. There were rows of monitors in various consoles, most of them cracked and covered in dust. At the far end of the room stood a large glass chamber, partially shattered. Inside the chamber were bodies. But not just any bodies. They were human, or at least once had been. "We're not the first to stumble into this nightmare," Claire muttered, stepping closer to the glass. "This is where they were testing it." What were they testing?" Jake asked, his voice hoarse. "The virus," Claire said grimly, the truth dawning on her. This is where it all began. The realization struck them all at once. They were standing in the heart of the monster they had been running from, this lab, the breeding ground of the nightmare that had torn their world apart. And now, they were trapped inside. The silence in the lab was suffocating. For a moment, Claire, Sarah, Jake, and James stood in the shadowy room, listening to the distant scratching and thumping from the mutants still clawing at the door. They were safe, for now, but the unsettling reality of their situation began to weigh heavily on them. Their temporary escape had only brought them deeper into the heart of the terror. "We're not safe here," Claire said quietly, breaking the silence. Her voice was tense, her mind already working on the next steps. "We need to find out what this place is and what those things were being used for. It's our only shot at understanding how to stop them." "We don't even know how to stop them," Sarah said, her voice trembling. She wiped her forehead, her face pale with exhaustion. "We're just buying time." Jake limped over to one of the old monitors, his hands still clutched around his bloodied arm. He winced with each step but was determined to help. The flickering screens seemed like an ancient relic, but they might hold the key to their survival. "Maybe we can find some answers in here," he muttered, wiping away the grime on the screen. The glow from the monitor cast a pale light over his face, revealing the strain in his eyes. James, ever the realist, paced the room nervously. "We don't have time to play with old computers, Jake. Those things are going to break through any minute." Claire glanced at the door. The mutants' persistent scratching and growling were growing louder, but there was something else, something new. The vibrations in the room had intensified, a low hum that seemed to come from beneath their feet, as though the very foundation of the lab was awakening. "James is right," Claire said, her tone sharp. "We don't have much time. We need answers, and we need to move fast." "Jake, what are you seeing?" Jake's fingers flew over the dusty keyboard, trying to make sense of the outdated system. "I'm accessing the files. It's slow, but, hold on, I think I've got something." He leaned closer to the screen, his eyes widening. This is it. This is the source code of the virus. There's a research report here, detailing the stages of infection, the mutation process." He paused, his voice growing darker. "And there's something else, something they were planning to release." Claire's heart skipped a beat. "Release? What do you mean? What were they planning?" Jake's face paled as he read the report. "It's not just a virus. It's a pathogen, a living organism. They were working on enhancing it, on making it more adaptable, more deadly." And then, his eyes widened in shock. "There's a date here. A launch date. They were going to release it across the world." Claire's breath caught in her throat. "What? When?" Jake looked at her, his face grim. "It's today." The launch was scheduled for the day everything fell apart. A wave of horror swept over the group. The outbreak they had been fighting for so long had been orchestrated, by people who saw the world as nothing more than a lab experiment. The truth was worse than they had imagined. Humanity had doomed itself. "We need to destroy this place," Claire said, her voice resolute. "We can't let them finish what they started." Jake looked up from the monitor. "I don't know if we can. There's no telling what kind of failsafe systems they've set up in here. If we trigger the wrong thing, we could make it worse." "We don't have a choice," Claire insisted. "We've seen what happens when we wait too long. If we don't act now, we're just going to be another part of their experiment." The hum beneath their feet was becoming louder, and Claire could feel the ground shaking slightly. Something deep within the lab was moving, coming to life. The air was thick with a sense of dread, and she knew that whatever had caused the outbreak wasn't just an accident. The lab was alive with purpose. Sarah stepped forward, her voice filled with determination. "So, what now? We leave, or we fight?" "We fight," Claire said, her voice sharp and full of purpose. "We don't know what's waiting for us outside, but we know this lab is where it all started. If we can destroy it, maybe we can stop this nightmare from spreading any further." Suddenly, the wall next to them rumbled, and a metal door slammed open with a deafening clang. The room was flooded with an eerie green light. Claire's hand instinctively moved to her weapon, but what came through the door wasn't a mutant, it was something worse. A figure stepped into the light, a man, but not fully. His eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity, his body twisted and contorted in ways that defied human form. He was tall, too tall, his limbs unnaturally long, and his skin was an ashen gray, stretched tight over a skeletal frame. He wasn't fully dead, but he wasn't alive either. He was a hybrid, a human-zombie creature, a product of the experiments that had taken place here. "You're too late," the creature said, its voice a hollow rasp that sent a chill down Claire's spine. "The world you knew is already gone." Claire's grip tightened on her weapon as the creature stepped closer, its movements smooth and predatory. The air around it crackled with energy, and the others stepped back, fear creeping into their eyes. "Destroy it," Claire ordered, her voice low and filled with defiance. "We finish this now." Without warning, the creature lunged. The fight for survival had just become far more personal. The creature's eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity as it lunged at them, its grotesque form moving with terrifying speed. Claire barely had time to react, her heart pounding as the creature's skeletal hand reached for her throat. But she was ready. With a swift motion, she ducked under its outstretched arm, bringing her weapon down hard on its side. The sound of the impact echoed through the room as the creature let out a guttural growl. The blow didn't take it down, but it staggered back for a moment, giving Claire the chance to regain her footing. The others were still backing away, fear etched on their faces as they scrambled to find anything they could use to fight back. "We need to destroy it," Claire shouted over her shoulder. "We can't just kill it, we have to stop it for good." Jake grabbed a metal pipe from the floor, his eyes wide with panic. "What are we supposed to do? It's stronger than anything we've faced." The creature hissed again, its head snapping towards Jake as it charged forward. Its movements were erratic, faster than any of them had anticipated, but Claire's instincts kicked in. She raised her weapon just in time to block its claws from reaching Jake's throat. The force of the creature's attack sent Claire sprawling backward, but she held onto her weapon, using it as leverage to push the creature away. "Get away from her!" Sarah screamed, charging forward with a piece of broken glass she had grabbed from a nearby table. She lunged at the creature, slashing at its arm. It recoiled with a shriek, but it wasn't enough to stop it. The creature swiped at Sarah with terrifying force, sending her crashing into the wall. "Sarah!" Jake cried, his face pale as he turned to her. Claire's heart raced as she pushed herself up from the floor. She knew they didn't have much time. The creature was stronger, faster, and it was only a matter of time before it overwhelmed them. The walls of the lab trembled again, and the hum from the heart of the facility grew louder. They were running out of time, and they were out of options. "Claire, we need a plan." James shouted from the back of the room, his eyes wild with fear. "We can't just fight this thing forever." Claire's mind was racing as the creature moved towards them again. They needed to find a way to stop it, permanently. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on the monitors Jake had been working on. The screen that had shown the virus data flickered again, revealing something new, a sequence of numbers and symbols that made Claire's blood run cold. "I've got it," she muttered, her fingers pointing toward the screen. "That's the failsafe. The system, they built a kill switch into the lab. If we can trigger it, we can destroy everything here and take down the creature with it." Jake's face lit up with understanding. "How do we activate it?" Claire scanned the data, her mind piecing it together as fast as she could. "We need to override the main terminal. It's in the control room across the lab. I can access the system from there." But before she could say another word, the creature was upon them once more, its claws slashing through the air. Claire barely had time to react as she ducked and rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature's attack. The others were still reeling from the previous hits, and the creature's strength was overwhelming. It was only a matter of seconds before they were all overpowered. "Claire, go!" Jake shouted, pushing her toward the door to the control room. "We'll hold it off as best we can." Claire hesitated for a moment, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. She knew that if she left, the others might not make it out. But she also knew they had no chance of survival if they didn't destroy the lab. Without the failsafe, this nightmare would never end. "Stay alive," Claire said, her voice grim. "I'll be back." With that, she sprinted toward the control room, the sounds of the creature's growls and the desperate shouts of her friends echoing behind her. As she ran, her mind stayed focused on the terminal, on the only thing that could stop the nightmare. The control room was eerily silent when she entered, the monitors flickering as she approached the main terminal. She moved quickly, her hands shaking as she typed in the override codes from the data Jake had uncovered. The room buzzed with life as the system came to life, and Claire could hear the creature's shrieks growing louder outside the door. "Come on," Claire whispered to herself, desperation creeping into her voice. "Come on, work." The final command entered. The countdown began, and a loud, mechanical hum filled the room. The lab shuddered as power surged through the facility, the walls vibrating in response. It was happening. But just as Claire turned to leave, the door to the control room slammed open. The creature had found her. With a snarl, it lunged at her, but Claire didn't hesitate. She grabbed the closest object, a fire extinguisher, and swung it with all her strength at the creature's head. It staggered back, but the creature was relentless, its body nearly unscathed. Claire's mind raced as she tried to buy herself enough time to escape. The countdown was almost finished, but she couldn't stop now. "Please," Claire whispered, running toward the door. "Just one more second." The countdown hit 0. There was a deafening explosion, and the world seemed to shake beneath her feet. The lab erupted in a burst of light, and the creature let out a final, horrific screech before it disintegrated into nothing. The walls crumbled, and the structure began to collapse around her. Claire staggered out of the room just as the lab began to fall apart, dust and debris filling the air. She couldn't hear anything over the sound of the collapsing facility, but she knew that the nightmare was finally over. As she emerged from the wreckage, she saw Sarah, Jake, and James standing a few feet away, bruised and battered but alive. The survivors were few, but they had made it through. Together, they had fought, and together, they had won. The world outside had changed forever, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, they had hope. The battle for the new world had been won.